Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's Chris. Claire, say hello.
Hi, I'm Claire. Not Chris.
Today, as Paul has mentioned, we're going to be talking about flow, or more specifically, flow-spiration, admin tasks you never thought to automate.
Chris, was it your intention to have your camera switched off?
To save bandwidth, but I'll turn my
Okay.
camera on. Do you want me to turn my camera on? I'll turn my camera on. There we go. Hello. So, now you get two of me. My name's Chris. I am a 14 times certified pre-sales consultant for a London-based consultancy called Make Positive. I'm also a lightning champion, so everyone on the call who's a lightning champion, you're amazing. Claire, tell us a bit about you.
I'm Claire Jones. I'm end user admin, and I've got two certifications because I don't think certifications necessarily mean prizes. I am one of the leaders of the London admin user group, and as Paul said, I do have a golden hoodie, which I'm not going to show you right now, but I do have a really cute little astro and a gold jacket.
Amazing. So, as I mentioned at the top, we're going to be talking about flow. Now, to put that into a little bit of context.
Can I just pause you here for 1 second, Chris, because I forgot to say something. If you've got questions whilst Chris and Claire are speaking, type them on the chatter, and then Justina will shout them out if she thinks it's, if she wants to interrupt you. Otherwise, she will bank them and hold on and ask them at the end. If you want to keep your cameras on, that's great, because Claire and Chris can then know how they're doing and read your reactions. If you want to turn them off, that's equally fine, and we understand that. And with that, back over, sorry.
It's okay. So, as I mentioned at the top, we're going to be talking about flow. Now, to frame that, we're going to be throwing a few scenarios at you and talking through those scenarios and really showing how myself and Claire have come to our design for these flows. So without further ado, I'm going to click forward. So here we've got Maria, boss lady, and she's come to Claire and she said, hey Claire, can you make sure that all our new employees get added to a company announcements chatter group? Oh, and post a message on their start date to welcome them and introduce them to everyone. Also, can you remind their manager to arrange the various briefs for the first week? So this is your standard email or Slack message that you would get from your boss asking you to make some changes in Salesforce. Everything's just a jumbled message, and we need to pick the things out of that. So let's start picking. So the first thing that we noticed, we want to be able to have a new employee automatically added to a chatter group. We want to post a welcome message when that new employee starts. And we want to remind the manager that they need to arrange some HR briefings, maybe arrange a lunch on their first day, and meet the team, things like that. So 3 main things that our manager wants us to deal with in Salesforce, and we want to automate it because, let's face it, we're lazy. And today we're going to be using Flow, and we're going to show you how to do that. But on this specific example, Claire's already been busy. Claire has already started to build this scenario. So Claire, do you want to load up your Salesforce and show everyone what you've built?
Yeah, I would. Can you stop sharing, please?
I can stop sharing.
Lovely. And when I find my Zoom console, there we go. Share this screen. Okay. So hopefully you're now seeing the back of my Salesforce. I'm in the setup menu. Is that right?
Yep, we can see a user.
Cool. Well, I'm not actually going to start on the actual user. I'm going to go into the user object. So in order for this all to work, one of the things I really need to know is when that user is actually starting with the company, because I can create the new user record, but if I don't know the day they're starting, I can't post the chatter message, for example. So I started off by going into my object manager, finding the user object and creating a new field called starting date. And it's just a date field. And because I'm good, I gave it a description to specify it's the employee starting date. So that's where I started. Then I went into Process Builder because I need something to watch for these new user records being created and that start date being populated. And I created my new process on my user object, and I set it to run when the record is created or edited, because I might change the date that my user is going to start. Then I set my first criteria for the action, and in this case I wanted to monitor whether my starting date is changed. Now, a lot of people would probably select conditions are met, and then if you've seen Process Builder before, you'll know that you get the option to select a field, then select the operator, so starting date equals, and then a certain value. Now, the reason I've not used that is because I want to be able to schedule actions. I want to post my message to my user on the day they actually start, so they see it, and not on the date that I created my user record, which might be 4 weeks in advance. And the only way that I can actually select that extra option is by building a formula to monitor whether this field is changed. If I use the standard conditions, I can't then tick, do you want to execute the action only when the specified change is made? So that's a little complicated, but anyway, I did that. And then in my immediate actions, I'm launching a flow, which I'm going to show you in a minute. And this is what will add the user to the chatter group and also create the tasks for the manager. And then I added a scheduled action, which is 0 days after the starting date. I want to post chatter, welcome new starter message. I'm posting it in my company announcements chatter group, and it just says, please welcome the new user to the family and that they've joined in this department and what their job title is. So now I'm going to show you what that flow looks like. Okay. It's got 5 nodes, quite simple. The first thing I did when I came in here is I had to create a variable to store the record ID for the user record that's just about to be created. And I called it user ID, and it's of data type text, because a user ID is text. And the really important thing is that I had to make it available for input. That means that in my process builder, I can tell it, pass the ID of my user record into this flow and then do all the actions on that user. Once I'd done that, I went back to my elements menu and I started to build out my flow. My first node is I went and got details of that user. I want to know what department they're joining. I want to know the date of their start. I want to know what their name is so that I can personalize messages to them. So I've given it the label user details. I've told it that I want to get records of the type user. I want the conditions. I want it to meet certain conditions. So the user record I'm looking for, the ID field has to equal the user ID field that I just created. So this is the variable that I just created. And then I'm only going to, and I'm going to automatically store all of the fields from this record, because I don't know which ones I might want to use.
So Claire, Dennis has just asked an interesting question, which I was thinking about before. from summer 20, you were able to actually have Flow automatically fire
Yes.
when there's a new record. But I believe that we still can't actually schedule that follow-up action, which is why we're still using Process Builder in this case. Is that right?
Yes, that is basically right. You can't schedule actions in Flow at the moment. What you can do is there is an element here called a pause, and you can build a pause element in. But I'm someone who's pretty familiar with Flow, and I have yet to get pauses to work correctly for me. So what I would say is, if you want simplistic scheduling, stick with using Process Builder as your trigger, as the thing that's watching the records. If you don't need to schedule, then you don't need Process Builder anymore to kick these things off.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. Don't like that pause element. Anyway, so we got our records. The next thing that we need to do is we need to get the ID of the chatter group that we're going to add this user to. Now, you might ask, why have I not just gone to the chatter group and taken the ID out of the URL and fed that into my Flow as well? The reason I'm not doing that is because I hit on a really interesting problem in my current company. We have these flows that post to chatter groups. And the problem is that when you create a sandbox to test functionality, the ID of your chatter group changes. And in Process Builder, it looks like what you've done is just said post in my company announcements chatter group, and you've not hard-coded the ID. But what you don't know is Salesforce has hard-coded that ID behind the scenes for you. So if you then create a record that posts to a chatter group in your sandbox, you'll get a fault email. So the reason that I'm doing it here is because I know that my chatter group is called company announcements. And so I can say, right, go and get the chatter group ID for my company announcements group and go and search for where the name equals company announcements. And this will mean that I never hit that problem because I'm getting that ID fresh in whichever environment I'm in, be it my production or my sandbox org. Now, one thing I want to mention here is when you are looking for chatter groups as your object type, it's very easy to get confused. There are two different objects that show as group. And if you're talking chatter, you're always looking for the one that's prefixed collaboration group. That is a chatter group. If it's just group on its own, that is a public group, like you might have in your settings for, I don't know, queue membership, whatever you use your public groups for, report visibility. So you're always looking for collaboration group. So this get records goes and says, go and find me the chatter group where the name equals company announcements. And again, I'm only storing the first record and I'm storing all of the fields. Then we create our record. So in order for a user to join a chatter group, you're creating a junction object that says, I want this user to be a member of that group. And what we're doing is we're creating one record. We're going to use separate resources and literal values to populate this because we want to set some specifics. The object, yet again, just to catch you out, you're looking for a collaboration group member, not the group member, which is your public group. So you're looking for collaboration group member. And then I'm setting 4 field values. The first is the collaboration group ID, and that is the ID that we've just gathered from our record. Then I'm setting a collaboration role, and you might think, what is that? Well, when you add someone to a group, you have 2 options. You can make them a manager or you can make them a member, and this is member. Then I'm adding my member ID, which is the user ID that I'm passing into my flow at the beginning. And then I can also set, one of the really good things here is I can set my notification frequency. There's nothing more annoying than adding a user to a group and realizing that they've set their notifications to never. Because sometimes you actually want them to get messages. And in my company announcements group, I want to default them to every message. Now, yet again, Salesforce is really helpful. You put a P in here. You don't know what P means. But if I click out of it, you can see I've got all my pick list values in here. And I want email on each post. And that equates to a P in Salesforce World. And then the last thing that I did is my manager asked me to set up some briefings for the first week. And I came here and I grabbed an action. And I'm going to tell my manager by creating some tasks. So I just came in here, and while I'm filtering on all, I typed task. Whoops. And somewhere down the bottom, I have the option to create a brand new task. I'm just going to show you the ones that I did earlier. And this is really simple to set up. You give it a name, obviously, and an API name as you would normally. You always give them a description, even if it's really straightforward and it does what it says on the tin. Then I'm going to assign it to my manager ID. Now, just to show you if you've never used these before, you go and look for your, oops, for your get record thing. Sorry, it's not playing nice at the moment. This is my user record from my user details get records. And then I want the manager. So I just type that in and I'm looking for manager ID. Then you can set your due date. I did something clever with a formula because I wanted to assign them to the manager 7 days before the user starts. But in reality, you can just click in here and put a starting date in there or a date. And then I've set my subject. So here, arrange health and safety briefing for, and then again, I've grabbed the name of the user from my user record, just as I did higher up. Now, when it came to the team lunch one, I'm lazy. I don't like to redo all of that again. I just want to show you a little bit of cool functionality. If you're selected on one of these and you want to do basically the same thing again, you come over to the right-hand side to your little buttons.
Left.
Thank you. To the left-hand side and find your little buttons. There's one here that actually is duplicate. And if I click on that, it copies that action completely again. And I can come in here and change whatever I want. So in the previous one, I changed it to team lunch. This time I'm going to change it to corporate briefing. I don't know, we might have a corporate briefing of some description. And it's really easy. I'm changing really minimal things. Oops. And then when I come down here again, just change that. Done. That's now my corporate briefing, and I can just grab the node and plug it in. And that's what I did. Then I hit save, gave it a name, then I activated it. And I now want to prove it works, because you know, what good is a flow if you don't test and prove it works? So here is a user that I created before. His name's Alfonso Starnini. I don't know why, that's just the name I gave him. I am set as his manager. And if I scroll down to the custom fields on here, his starting date was the 17th of May, which happens to be yesterday. If I go to my company announcements group, if I look at my members, I can see that Alfonso has been added as a member. And I can also see, here's my chatter message. Please welcome Alfonso to the family. He's joined the customer service department as technical advisor. And then finally, if I go to tasks, I can see that because I'm his manager, I have 2 tasks there with a due date 7 days from now, because that's what I chose. And there's my health and safety briefing, and there's my team lunch. Back to you, Chris.
So, this will stop the other person from sharing their screen. So Claire has been busy. Thank you, Claire. So what we just saw there, with just one process builder and one flow and one new custom field, we've been able to add a new employee to a chatter group. We've been able to post a welcome message on the day that they start, and we've been able to remind their manager. One custom field, one process builder, one flow. And what you saw there, depending on how familiar you are with Flow, that might seem really complicated, but it's built now and it never needs to be touched again. As long as our business process stays fairly static and we're happy with our new starter process, all we ever need to do now is create a new user, punch in a start date, and Salesforce takes care of the rest. But unfortunately, businesses don't stay static. Businesses do move along. And Claire's been sent a new message from her manager. Starts off with the praise though. The new starter stuff is working great, but can we do something for the leavers too? I want to make sure, for data security reasons, that user cannot access Salesforce once we know they are leaving. Can you edit their name to make it obvious that the record owner has left the business? And maybe could you remind the manager to carry out an exit interview? So again, huge message, a number of requirements. Let's break those requirements down. So the first one, as soon as we know that user is leaving, we need to freeze that account. We then need to deactivate that user on the day that they leave. So freeze them so they can't access Salesforce, but then deactivate their user account once they've left the business. Put some marker on their record so we can easily see that they are actually leaving or have left. And again, as we did before, remind the manager that they need to book an exit interview. So let's jump into this with the slide that I forgot that I'd put in. So what are we going to need to achieve this? Well, before we had a custom field, we had a process builder, and we had a flow. So we need to find a way to track when they're leaving. We had a start date. Why not have an end date? Simple. We want a way to stamp the day that they're leaving for auditing reasons, just so we know when the record's changed, we know when it was changed and who by. We need a way to freeze that user, and with that we're going to use Flow. We need a way to deactivate that user. Again, we're going to use Flow. We need a way to edit the user's name, and we're going to use Flow. All of these are probably going to be using Flow. And we need a way to set a task for that manager. Now with this one, we do actually have options. We could use Flow and we could use Process Builder. So let's see where we lead. And let's go. So before, Claire had built everything. Here and now, we're going to be building it all live, genuinely building it all live. Nothing that you see today is prepared. We're going to be doing it all in front of you. So Claire, do you want to take over?
Sure. Okay, we're back in Salesforce. It's all exciting.
Yeah. So
What
as
am I
I
doing
mentioned,
first, Chris?
we need to create some custom fields on that user account, on that user record, sorry, on that user object. Words. I need to give some of my certs back. So
The good thing is I'm still on the right page. So I don't have
you are.
I'm in my object manager and I'm on my user object.
So let's create some custom fields.
Okay. I'm going to create a date field.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it leaving date. Always put description in.
Because I never do, and I'm terrible for doing it.
No, it's really good when you go back to the field later on and you think, why on earth did I create that? Okay, And I'm also, while I'm here, going to create an admin text field, because then I can make notes in it and tell it when I deactivated them and things like that. So, oops. It doesn't matter if your description matches the field name. It's just important to give it a description. Oh, and my mouse is frozen. Oh, there we go. Cool. Fields created.
Great. So we've now got our fields. We should be able to now create our flow.
Okey-doke. New flow.
New flow.
Right, I'm going to do an auto-launched flow because just like the previous one, I'm going to use Process Builder to kick this off because I know that I want to schedule the deactivation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to freeze now, schedule later. So I'm going to use auto-launch. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable to store the ID of my user so I know who I'm working with.
Claire, just clarification. Did you make the field only visible for the admin or for everyone? Question from the public.
I did just then make it visible for everyone. In real life, I would probably only make it available for your admin. Same with your admin notes. You don't, you know, if you've got multiple admins, you might make comments on people's records to say, I've told this person how to do this 6 times. You don't want that person being able to see it. So yeah, in the real world, make it available to your system admin only.
Or you
Okay,
could
thank
have
you.
those comments published to chatter. This person is difficult to work with.
I've never done that. Anyway. No.
So you're creating a user
okay,
ID.
so data type text again, and available for input because I need to pass this user record ID into my flow. Okay, now this first flow that I'm going to build is the isfrozen one.
Yes.
It's really easy to do this because I'm just going to update a record.
And I presume you just update the user object, the user record.
Well, that's what you would hope. And again, as with a lot of things in Salesforce, sometimes a little bit of insider knowledge is good. Now, if you wanted to change the name of the user or their license or their profile type, yes, you would look for the user object. Unfortunately, oh, hang on, specify conditions. Unfortunately, with freezing a user, there is a special object type that no one really knows about called user login. And user login has 2 purposes, and I will show you what they are in a minute. So I'm looking for the user login record where the ID equals my user ID variable that I created. Now, the 2 uses of user login. The first is frozen. That's the one we're going to use.
Mm-hmm.
Also have the option of is password locked. So if you want to auto unlock your users' passwords when they keep changing them and they get locked because they've changed it 10 times in 5 minutes, you could, if you really wanted to, create a flow to unlock your users' passwords. Don't recommend it. But anyway, we want is frozen, and we have 2 options here, true or false. So is frozen true?
So before you click done, just if you could just go back in.
I can, yes.
Just want to step through that. So you're searching through the user login object,
Mm-hmm.
and you're looking for every single record where the user ID matches the ID we are passing in.
Thanks, I actually picked up the wrong one. Yes, I want the one that says user ID. Don't select the one that says ID, you want user ID.
So we're looking for any records where the user ID matches the ID we are passing in. And that's
Correct.
only going to have one result, right?
Exactly.
And then on that record, we're looking for a little tick box that says is frozen, and we're ticking it. We're checking that
Yes.
checkbox. Okay,
Yeah.
I understand.
Cool. But thanks for making me go back in, otherwise this would never have worked. Okay. And
So that's the freeze user. So
that
if
is
we
the
only,
freeze user once
we
we
only-
collect it up.
if we only needed to freeze the user, this flow would be ready.
Yeah.
But we're not gonna, are we?
Okay,
So perfect.
and I'm going to hit the activate button because
Yep.
it's quite important.
But that's only the start of our work. So we've got a flow to freeze that user. We now need to be able to deactivate that user.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to leave this screen because I don't need this anymore. I don't need the update records anymore, so I can delete that. But I've already got in here my variable that I'm going to need because I still need to pass in the user ID again. So I'm going to use this one, and then when I'm ready, I can hit save as. I don't need to start again.
You're going to save it as a copy.
I'm going to save it as a copy. Actually, I can even do that now. So I come in here, and rather than leaving it on a new version, I can hit new flow.
Good question, Arman. I had exactly the same question. So I was under the impression, oh, they're leaving. Let's deactivate their user. If you deactivate a user while there are flows, processes working in the background, approvals, it
Scheduled
messes that
actions.
up. Yeah. So by freezing that user, it allows all of those in progress things to finish.
Yeah, otherwise they don't carry on, and in some cases your admin can get, well, error messages.
Yeah. So as we're going to demonstrate, we're going to freeze the user when they immediately are notified that they're leaving, and then on their leaving date, that's where they're actually deactivated, freeing up that license.
Cool. So because I've saved this now as my new flow, so it's got a new name now, it's now called deactivate user. I'm getting a warning just because there's nothing connected to the start element. So these warnings are not necessarily a bad thing. You might know that it won't run. So don't always worry if you see a warning. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get my get details from the user record. So I've passed in the ID of the user record, but I'm going to go and grab things like the user's last name so that I can manipulate it, and anything that might currently be in the administrator notes field, because I don't want to overwrite those notes. I just want to add my new note to what's already there. So I'm going to grab a get records. It's of type user. This time we actually do want the user object.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got some match conditions. So I want the ID field, user ID, to equal the user ID variable that I already have. I'm only going to store the first record. There will only be one record with that user ID, but I'm going to leave it on only the first record. And again, I'm going to store all the fields. Now, Chris, when we were talking this through, you threw me when we did our practice on this, because you asked me what the other options were. Salesforce obviously have updated Flow, and they're doing it constantly. And you used to have to choose which fields you wanted, and then define individual variables to store those values. Then they got clever, and they said, rather than creating individual variables to store those values, you can create an object of type user and store all those values. But you still had to define, you had to give it a name and tell it that it was a record, and it was messy. Now, we can literally leave this on automatically store all fields, and Salesforce does all the work for us. We don't have to create a variable to store the last name, a variable to store the profile name, a variable to store our leaving date. We now leave it on automatic and Salesforce does it for us. Okay, that's my get records. What am I doing?
What are you doing, Claire?
I don't know.
So you've got the information from that user.
Yes. So now I know what I'm doing. I'm going to update the user. I could do that, couldn't I?
Could update the user, yes.
Oh, update records. Thanks, Chris. Oops. Okay. So how are we going to find the records that we want to update? We're going to specify the conditions.
Yep.
And again, we want the ID to equal our user ID variable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we get to set which fields we want to update on the user record. So, first one, I'm going to change them to not active. So we're looking for the is active field, or you can just type active or a part of it and it will appear.
Yep.
And I'm going to set the value to false.
Because that's just a checkbox. So once it's
a
unchecked,
checkbox.
they're deactivated.
Exactly. So that if we were just deactivating and not doing anything else, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to edit their last name. Now, I always think it's really annoying when you're looking at a record and you go and look at who the owner is, and it's really obvious to me that that person no longer works for the company or doesn't have a Salesforce license. So I like to edit their last name and just stick an asterisk in front of it. So it's a really small symbol, but I know when I look at that user record, I know instantly that that person no longer works here and that I need to find someone else to take ownership of that record. So I'm going to look for my last name and the value. Well, I've got my user from user record and I'm going to look for last name again. And now, so this is the field. So I'm replacing currently last name with exactly the same thing. Then I can just literally stick an asterisk in front. So just try zooming in a little bit. Yeah, you still can't read it. I've stuck a little asterisk in front.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I want to write to our admin notes field just to say that the user was deactivated on this date, because you might reactivate them at some point in the future. I used to work in an industry where people kept coming back to work for us. So I just wanted to keep it for posterity. Again, I'm not going to overwrite the admin notes because there must be something really useful in there. So I'm going to start by leaving the existing admin notes in there. But just in front of that, I am going to type, actually, copy this. You'll see why in a minute. And then I'm going to remove it. And I'm going to go and look for the current date. So I want to know when this date is flowing, because I want to know when the date that I'm actually deactivating the person. Now, there's a global variable already set up for me called flow. And if I click through, I can grab the current date.
Yep.
So I want that field. I'm going to write deactivation date in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the field that I went looking for previously, I'm just going to paste it afterwards. So this is now going to read deactivation date, today's date, and then anything else that was already in that admin notes field, because I don't want to delete that. And then I'm going to hit done. Anything you want to say, Chris?
No. So we've done our freeze. We've got our deactivate. Let's get this all tied together.
Cool. So you grab the node at the bottom to join them up.
Mm-hmm.
We already gave it its new name, so I can just hit save. And then I can hit act. Now I could debug it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to go build my process. But just to let you know, there's a really nice little debug feature here. talk about that another time. Oh, I need a new process. Or do I?
Do you, Claire?
Cheers, Chris. Chris, why don't I need a new process?
Because it's best practice to have one process per object. So because we already have a process on the user object, we should affect this one, append it with our leaving process instead of creating two processes. Because if you have two processes on one object, you can't guarantee which one's going to fire first. So this gives us much more control.
Excellent. So I can just clone it using my clone button, and I can leave it reading that it's a version of the current process and save it. Okay. So now I need to add some criteria again. And what we've said is that on the day that we find out that the person is leaving, so i.e. on the day that we put a date in that leaving date field, we're going to do something. We're going to freeze that user. So and here I am going to just leave it on set conditions, and I'm actually going to do leaving date is null. So this is when we're setting a user date is null, false. So this means that if the leaving date is not null, it's a double negative. I'm sorry if you don't like them. And then again, because we're going to schedule actions, we're going to actually deactivate the user completely on the date that they're actually leaving. We need to tick execute the actions only when specified changes are made. And this will then give us our scheduled actions when I save.
Cool.
Our immediate action is we're going to deactivate, and we've got our, sorry, we're going to freeze
yeah.
our flow that we created. So we select flow in action type. And then we can see these are our active flows. Freeze my user. And then you see it asks you, do you need to tell it any variables? And in here, this is the flow variable I created called user ID.
And that's, you can see that because you ticked that available for input.
Exactly. If I had ticked available for input, there'd be nothing in that box. And I'm going to pass it a field reference. And what I want to pass it is I want to pass it the user ID. Now, hopefully, if you just type ID, you don't have to scroll forever to find user ID. Okay, and that is my flow, my freeze user flow all plugged in.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's going to happen on the day we find out the person's leaving. The day that they actually leave, that's the date that we've chosen, we're going to actually deactivate them. You have to set a schedule. And I'm going to say 0 days after, there we go, leaving date. Setting a schedule is that simple. And for whoever asked about can you schedule actions in Flow earlier, it's a lot more complicated in Flow. So this is just simple.
Yeah. So once you activate that, oh, you've got to add the action.
I need to add my other flow.
You need to add the action, yeah.
But that's okay, there you go. And again, pass it in the variable. Play nice, yeah, there we go. There we go.
So all you'd need to do is
Activate
activate
this.
that.
Yes, but didn't we say something about creating a task for the manager to arrange an exit interview?
We did, but we're running late.
Are we? Have we got time to do that bit as well or not?
There's a bunch of great questions that I think we should.
So we're not going to do
answer.
that, but we could do that in here.
Yeah.
And then we activate. And just to sort of prove this works, I can't show you the deactivation, but I can show you the freezing because it happens pretty quickly. I come in here, leaving date, today, save. And look, you see now this says unfreeze. He's already been frozen.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Okay. Share screen. Okay, mouse. So what did we just see? With a few fields and a few flows and one process builder, we were able to freeze the user immediately. And we can go into detail why we did that in a second. We were then able to deactivate the user on their leaving date. We were able to add an easy marker on their record. And we were going to do the arranging a meeting with their manager for the leaving date, but we ran out of time because we want to actually address these questions. This is a slide just to show next steps, but actually I am just eager to tackle some of these amazing questions that came up. So,
can I suggest, hello everyone, thank you very much, Claire. Can I suggest two things? One, if you're desperate and waiting, but you need to go because you've got something else that you should be doing, like walking the dog or something, for example, that comes to my mind. There is an opportunity to win another voucher. We have taken your details, so if you need to go, that is fine, and we will make sure that if you do win the voucher, it wings its way to you. I'm going to look at Justina and just say, because I didn't text her in the meantime, how about 10 minutes for questions? We'll see how the conversation goes. Justina, does that sound reasonable to yourself? Because we are late because we started late. We started your presentation late, so that is on us, but we're also mindful that other people have other things to do tonight. Justina, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that should be fine.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to disappear again. Bye.
Chris, you want to go through the questions, or you want me to read the questions that were in the chat?
If you want to read the questions,
Or whatever you prefer. So on one hand, there was a confusion. Why would you freeze user and deactivate it? Why both actions were not only one? I know that Chris answered a little bit that you freeze when it's still.
I have a prepared statement.
Go for it.
Your Salesforce help documents.
Okay.
This does mean that you have to understand some Salesforce terminology, but you know, it says paused and waiting interviews can't be resumed for inactive users. Therefore, it is good practice to freeze users for a period before deactivating them. The length of the period you freeze a user for should be the maximum, hang on, I've written this down wrong, but should be the maximum delay that you have built into any scheduled actions. So if you have a scheduled action that runs 12 months after a user performs an action, if you follow Salesforce's advice, your user would be frozen for 12 months before you deactivated them. Now, we know that's not actually practical in the real world. Quite often we're struggling for licenses. So what you can do is you freeze your user, and then an admin can go and investigate paused flows, and you can see which ones were paused because of that user. And then you can do things to reschedule the action that should have happened. And then you can deactivate the user.
Okay,
and that's
cool.
that's scheduled Apex as well, Claire.
Yes.
So there was also a question. So if you can build the flow to make users remove them from approvals and other stuff they are in, or it's too complex?
So you can't affect approvals, I don't believe, but I did see a question regarding if hierarchy, managers, and record ownership. You can absolutely. So in that leaving flow, we could have added a get records to find records where that user owns. Well, we can grab a set of records that is the manager or that user owns, and then we can reassign that user ID to someone else, maybe that person's manager. Obviously, it's something that we wouldn't be able to show in 30 minutes today, but you can, as long as you can grab a record and then update that record, for example, an owner ID, you can absolutely transfer ownership. You just can't actually affect in progress approvals.
No. I just wanted to, on that note, just give you an example of some of the things you could build into the leaving flow. Just an example. You can remove feature licenses, you can remove permission set assignments, you can remove people from public groups, chatter groups, you can remove user package licenses, you can remove people from queues, and you could also build in a notification if you've basically left your queue empty. You know, the possibilities are endless. So,
Okay. And you touched about the records owned by inactive users. So Vlad was asking, are there any problems with records owned by inactive user? In what case we would need to reassign the records?
there definitely can be problems with records owned by inactive users. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I can't remember what they are.
Opportunities and accounts, trying to delete certain things you can't do if it's an inactive user. It's mainly to do with the standard objects. It's not custom objects. It's standard functionality it trips over on.
Yeah, I believe there might be a problem with adding products to opportunities where the opportunity owner is inactive. That might just be in my org.
Okay, and the admin note was a long text field or normal text field? Are there any limitation on which field can be updated, or you can choose any field in the flow?
Any field can be updated. I did a long text area, but you can do a rich text area. You can do a 255 character just text field. You can edit whichever you want.
Okay, so then Dennis asked for clarification. So if I understand right, then the flow deactivate doesn't override all the reasons which you can't normally deactivate a user. I'm not sure if I understand, Dennis. You want to...
No, if there's a restriction, that restriction will still be in place. And
your admin will get an error message.
Yeah.
Whoever created the flow will get an error message saying we couldn't deactivate the user.
And can we do mass transfer records as well by flow?
Absolutely. So we saw in the screen, there was a get record, there was a create record, and there was an update record. If you want to mass transfer a series of records, you would use get record to find every single, let's say it's opportunities. We would use get record to find all of the opportunities owned by Jane Smith, who is leaving. And then we've got Bob Ross. Bob Ross has taken over Jane Smith. So we grab all of the opportunities that Jane Smith owns, we find Bob Ross's user ID, and then we stamp Bob Ross's user ID on all of those opportunities on the owner ID field. And then you transferred. It's as simple as that. Find that record and update that field and you're done.
But I would just like to say there is a perfectly good app in the App Store to do that. In the App Exchange to do that.
Okay, we have 3 more questions at least till now. What will happen when you hear somebody already left? Will this process still work?
Yeah, what it does is it freezes them instantly, and then within the 24-hour period, I think it's within an hour, it will deactivate them completely. So yeah, it doesn't help for your paused flows and Apex or whatever, but yeah, it would just do both things at once.
Okay, thank you. And then can you do some output variable from Flow inside Process Builder? That sounds like technical questions, but if we don't, Subbu, maybe you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, I think I just typed it wrong.
Okay.
In the flow, you can declare output variables.
Yeah.
When you call the flow from the process builder, you can get back the output variables from the flow. Can you do something with that output variable from the flow and assign to some other action? Or...
No.
Not in Process Builder.
No. Yeah.
You can in Flow. So the flows that we built, we could have invoked using. So we called Flow from a Process Builder. If we were calling Flow from another flow, we could we could use the variable in the
Output,
parent
yeah.
flow, but process builder can't do anything with output variables.
So a process builder is only aware of a number of things. It's aware of the record that it's been run from. It's aware of the user that's running it, and it's aware of the system time, some little system variables. What it's not aware, it's never aware of the flow that's running or any output from that flow. It's just the record, the user, and the system.
Okay, so
That makes
last
sense.
question, not the easiest one that we had till now. What advantages does Flow has over Process Builder to invoke Flow to further process as an auto launch?
Claire?
And Soshmita, please unmute yourself if I read wrongly a question.
Yeah, that's correct, Justina.
Sorry?
Yeah, what I wanted to know is we are calling a flow for deactivating and freezing the user, which is on the user object, which can be also done as I understand through the process builder.
Yeah.
What is the driving scenario that we choose Flow for this to do that process, deactivating a user or freezing a user?
I can answer that. With the freezing the user, you cannot access the user login object in Process Builder, but you can access it in Flow. With the deactivating the user, I think virtually everything that we did, we probably could have done in Process Builder.
Although if we wanted to then extend it to look for opportunities that that user owns and then transfer the ownership, that's something we would have to do in Flow.
Exactly. And there are other things. So if you wanted to develop it really much further and you know, bring in removing feature licenses and stuff, you can't do that in Process Builder. Do that in Flow. If you
At the end of the day,
people from queues, you can't do it in Process Builder.
at the end of the day, if you can, if what you're wanting to do can be done in Process Builder, do it in Process Builder. If you know a bit of Apex and you can write a trigger and it's easier to do in Apex with a trigger, do it in Apex with a trigger. Use the right tool for the right job. Use the tool that you're comfortable with. So we demonstrated something today that in Flow that you could do in Process Builder. Both options are equally right.
Yeah, got it. As Claire mentioned, we would need Flow for accessing the unrelated object user login, and for the second scenario, in case if it goes further in complex to accounts and opportunities, then is also Flow is an option. I got it.
Perfect.
So you had new questions appearing, but I will just put them aside and I will maybe email them to you guys, Claire and Chris, if you can
Absolutely.
answer. And then we can, just for time's sake, and we don't want to keep people
And if
longer.
anyone wants to ask directly, here are
or we can do that also.
tweets. Our Twitter, what's the word? Twitter handles.
So there was Dirk Jan and Vitaly. Please feel free to contact Claire and Chris directly for your questions, as one is really broad and it's very technical also.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.